Welcome to the TEAM01 Sprint number 6 presentation update for the Introduction to Health Informatics Fall 2020. Our project is the Ventilator Weaning Recommendation System, and our TA mentor is Raj Vanshia. Our TEAM01 members are Stephen Campbell, Mitzi Flagg, Carl Franklin, Micah Halter, Bhupinder Hayer, and Joseph Rayner. The following is our updated Gantt chart, which shows through week 8 that we have begun our integrated testing of the front end and back end and working on any fixes to items that we're finding issues with. We also have the individual updates, which I'll go over in more detail on the next slide. But this one shows that as a whole, we are about 50% complete with the integrated testing of the front end and back end. And the majority of that work this past week has been completing API calls that are not working or were not available, and working on the front end, making sure that the styles were more in line with our recommendations. We've also done some work on deployment and making sure that the application is available through HDAP. The following is the individual updates for each team member. For this past sprint, Bhupinder's focus was on the patient list view. He worked on updating the code for the backend API calls and linking those up to the front end patient list using our patient list JSON API calls, and also worked on creating the framework for the styles that we will be using for the different React data tables. Carl's focus this sprint was the patient detail view, and he also took the style changes that were made to the patient list and made those same style changes to the patient detail view, and then also worked on updating the code so that it was pulling from the backend APIs that have been created for those details. For Joseph, his major contribution this sprint was working on the API backend queries themselves and some general code maintenance. Some of the notable queries that he created were the patient list query that delivers all the different patient records for the home page, as well as an observation query and some database queries for the different charting functions. Micah's contribution this sprint was on the API backend query for calculating metrics, and has started work on implementing the risk score calculation in more detail for that API call for the front end as well as the patient detail page. Mitzi's focus this sprint was on the patient detail pop-up screen, being able to integrate the different charting functions through React and Chart.js, and also worked on updating the Gantt charts that were shown previously. Stephen's contribution this sprint has been completing the clinical simulation class, which allows driving the different observations and medications for the patient. He also worked on pointing to the public Happy Fire server since our local test server was having some performance issues, and also updated the patient list backend to pull the patient unit and room information. So the home page is almost complete with that information. For our data strategy and clinical research, the clinical research itself has been completed, as was discussed in prior sprints, and the majority of the work has been on the API calls, making sure that they match the research logic that we have for the risk score and the various ventilator observations that we're pulling in. The clinical simulation class itself is finished, as discussed earlier. It sets up the initial patient data for our demo and testing purposes and has a method, simulate patient change, as shown above, that allows the end user to improve or decline the state of the patient in order to drive the demo and simulation. I'm going to hand it off now to Joseph, that's going to go into more detail about the development progress on the front and back end and show a demonstration of the application.
Hey guys, this is Joseph. Just wanted to give you a quick update on our front end progress. So in response to our last sprint, we've made some UI changes, and as you can see here, we now have it simplified. We are also now dynamically loading our data from both the list view and detail view to use the backend calls. So right now, statistics is still being worked on, but patients list is being dynamically updated from our Fire server. And also patient detail, currently vitals and some patient details are being loaded from the backend calls. And I'll go ahead and show you that. All right, and then just here's a look at our front end app right now. As you can see, here's the sections I mentioned earlier. We have a statistics section, and in the patients list, you can actually select each one of these patients here, and you can get to the patient's detail page, which here's an example of that running right now. As you can see, the vitals are being pulled in from the backend as well. And down here, we'll be having a chart that will show the risk score. For the backend, I would just want to go ahead and give a quick overview of the structure. So on the right here, you can see how our packages are laid out. We have a constants package, which contains a single class called ventilator constants. This is where anything that's static in the project is kept for the backend. We have a database package. This is where we have the objects for our databases and the interfaces are kept. So each table has its own class object, which is loaded into from our database, and then use an interface to interact with that object. And finally, in our API folder, that is where we have each of our table controllers. As you can see here, we have a main table controller and we have a between controller. We have a Fire package. This is where any queries are done from the Fire server. And right now we have a query patient, which is kind of the catch-all. It has any miscellaneous queries we need. And then for each of our more critical queries, we have a class for that. So query big patient would be an example of one which gets basic patient details, and get patient observations gets us any observations for any of our patients. And finally, we have a Spring folder. This is just where any of our Spring elements are kept, and within the Spring folder is the API folder, which is where our REST calls are made. And for the remainder of the project, we will continue to use this structure. Expect to see maybe a few more classes created in the Fire package and the database package as needed. Just a quick update on our pipeline. Right now, our app is currently accessible at this URL here. It's running in it up. Our database is hosted on AWS, and our JDBC URL is here. We are also using the public R4 Fire server. And our build branch is currently at this URL for GitHub. So on build right now, Maven is running npm install on our front end, and once that's done, that build is moved to the resources folder in Spring, and from there, Docker compiles that together from a single WAR file, and then that is deployed to Kubernetes on HDAP. And there really hasn't been any changes in this sprint since the last sprint. We haven't encountered any major difficulties, and we expect to continue this process throughout the remainder of the project.
The following are the remaining items that we have for our project to complete it. Bhupinder will be working on correcting the names of the vitals that are pulling into the patient details screen and filling out the medication tables from the API. Carl is also going to be working with Bhupinder on that same item, as well as fixing the routing issue with the patient details page in our production deployment. Joseph is going to work on fixing any API calls with any issues found from integrated testing, and looking into some performance optimizations for queries that are running a bit slow. Micah will be completing the remainder of the risk score calculation to include medication logic, and will also be working with Joseph on optimizing the existing APIs. Mitzi will be finishing the additional vital sign charts and starting work on the CDS hook pop-up that will be based on the risk score value. And she will also be continuing integrated testing. Stephen will be working with Mitzi on the CDS hook pop-up and also continuing integrated testing and passing feedback to the others on the team to correct any issues with the front end or back end. Thank you again for listening to our TEAM01 Sprint number 6 update for the ventilator weaning recommendation system.